So I've been experimenting with a lot of non-ferromagnetic alternative strings, using a piezo pickup installed under the bridge of one of my guitar/bass mods. Admittedly, it's a weaker and harder to use signal, maybe simply because I don't have that fancy preamp you see in a lot of acoustic electric guitars. But there are plenty of other ferromagnetic materials and constructions we can test the tone of, while still actually using that 3 pickup layout of a Stratocaster, which maybe we should have done in the first place? Now, the last time we saw this monstrosity, we had coarse all the bass strings, making it technically 6 strings again. So in hindsight, for this video, we probably need to stick to that 3-string design again, so that each material has enough room to behave naturally without any interruptions. Taking the piezo out of the picture too, and reverting to that original Stratocaster wiring, we're good to try some experimenting, at least one last time for a nice trilogy series. This is Kevin from Said Too Much. In the first part, I used a smaller jack chain to interesting results, but I was wondering how would even bigger loop links fare. Attaching was again pretty straightforward, especially since parts of it are as thick as a ball end, and the wiring was no thicker than a heavy bass string. I found ways to secure it as is after cutting an appropriate length, although these huge loops make it sit a little sloppily. Now I got the idea of just braiding some strings together, something maybe similar to the twisted construction of the steel cables I had also bought for this experiment. So pulling 3 similar slightly used strings from my collection, I did just that, using one of my disposable hex wrenches to hold and secure the ball ends at the bridge, and found just running the trio across the machine head slit worked just as well as the chain. Finally, there's this material called Kanthal wire, which is that metal you might see turning bright orangish red as a heating element, from its special alloy properties and resistance. Despite getting a spool of relatively thinner gauge, this stuff was stiff as hell. I needed to use 2 pliers to try and tie a knot around a baseball end, and then going for a second knot to be safe, it turns out manipulating it too much made a piece of it twist clean off. So I figured 1 knot should probably be good enough, and it is. I stuck the wire into the machine head like a normal string this time, and when tuning up, I was surprised and curious to see it hit decent higher notes while still not having enough tension to fully straighten it out yet. Now the 0.125-inch steel cable fit perfectly in the saddle and nut grooves like an appropriately thick bass string, but securing it was a real head scratcher. I unraveled it and strung one of the frayed ends through a base ball end, tying it with dual pliers again because it was stiff like that heating wire was. It's so stiff in fact that I couldn't even cut some thinner strands with wire cutters, let alone the whole thing to get an appropriate length to the machine head. A little bit stumped, I turned to the 0.064-inch gauge, which without unraveling strung through a base ball end, with just a little less substantial unwinding to fit a frayed end into the machine head like a normal string. I did eventually find that I could cut some of those thinner ends with wire cutters if I just went at it for a while. But going back to the thick one, I concealed to a metal cutting tool on the Dremel to trim everything. Using the same method at the machine head, they're both finally in place. So lastly, we come to the weirdest one, twist ties. By just hooking and twisting the bunch of twisty ties I bought, they seem tightly interlocked, but I'm not sure how well they can handle serious tension. Attaching a ball end and stringing the other end directly down the machine head like normal, I'm at least able to get it pretty taut above the pickups before crossing my fingers going into the demo. So what do y'all think? Did some materials surprise you? Did some maybe have an interesting timbre when compared to just regular steel strings? A lot of interesting results to add to the series, in my opinion. I'd actually really like to rethink the piezo some more. I still think going back to the coarse design with nylon strings that wouldn't show up when switching to a magnetic pickup would be awesome if we could just sort out the piezo volume issue. And I've also had this kind of idea where we have a tremolo system that only affects some of the strings, like say the higher coursed ones. So we could emulate that detuned sound effect we stumbled upon, but at will. Like a couple of other monstrosities in my collection, there are probably going to be some major in-depth overhauls appearing soon. So enjoy what may be the finale of the alternative string series, and maybe revisit the previous two for comparisons, like say the first part's jack chain. For now though, enough said. For early video access, raw instrument tracks, and more exclusives, find our community on Patreon and consider adding your support.
Said so much.